London's famous skyline is changing. That's nothing new. From the growth of the Victorian era to the destruction of the Second World War, the concrete brutalism of the 60s and the financial services boom of the 80s, things have rarely stayed the same for long. But the most recent spate of high-profile, high-rise developments characterised by the walkie-talkie, the cheese grater and the shard might just be the thin end of the wedge. Hundreds more steepling monuments of steel and glass are either planned or are already being built, and many people aren't happy.
There is no vision for London.
It's anti-democratic and it's anti-social and it's just morally wrong.
We don't need to build these towers.
So do the protesters, campaigners and lobbyists have a point? Is London's balance of old and new architecture under threat? Should planning policy be radically overhauled? Or are these people merely the latest in a long line of NIMBYs, standing in the way of progress in a city that has to grow rapidly to accommodate new businesses and a projected 1.5 million more people by 2030, just to maintain its standing in the world? Recently released figures show that there are a staggering 436 tall buildings with 20 stories or more already in the pipeline for London. Of that total, 114 are proposed, 89 are under construction, and a further 233 have been approved but are yet to break ground. Of these buildings, 261 are between 20 and 29 stories, 112 are between 30 and 39, 38 have 40 to 49 floors, 17 have 50 to 59, and 8 would be 60 stories high or taller. Critics of the capital's existing and imminent tall buildings say that many of them house so-called buy-to-leave properties that are little more than safety deposit boxes for rich investors from less politically stable countries such as Russia and China, a symptom of confused, wrong-headed planning policy and a cause of both architectural eyesores and serious social problems. But, as you'd expect, there's another side to the story.
The need to build all these tall buildings is because of the pressure that we are under as a city to provide more housing and more commercial space in the city itself. We need to build about 50,000 homes a year, and we need to build those homes close to, or as close as possible, to where people are going to work, which is central London. So we do want those homes within the London boundary. So that means we need greater density. It also means in certain places we need to increase the height. About 80% of all the new tall buildings are for residential purposes. And that is because people want to live in them. Contrary to some of the research that's come out, the property is being sold, it is being bought, so there is a clear demand for it. The argument that all these tall buildings are just safety deposit boxes, we actually totally reject. It's worth just remembering that if you look at any of the tall buildings around London, other than the commercial ones, have got a large percentage of affordable housing. Those units of affordable housing would just not be built unless we had the high value properties within those same complexes, and many of those are of course going to foreign buyers.
What Londoners are interested in when they're judging whether it's appropriate to have more tall buildings is whether they fit the surroundings that they're going into. And one of the challenges, I think, and you can see that with many of these designs, is that they palpably don't fit.
But for other Londoners, such as Piers Corbyn, the aesthetic merit of the new towers is less important. The brother of the Labour leader Jeremy is campaigning against the redevelopment of the Aylesbury estate, which will see the current buildings bulldozed and replaced by a £1.5 billion scheme, including 3,500 new homes, of which Southwark Council says half are to be classed as affordable.
What we're seeing is the deliberate social cleansing of ordinary people from London en masse, and the council are doing it through misleading and deliberately lying. Communities and people's lives are meaningful by social interaction, and these destroy social interaction. They're not revitalising anything, they're destroying everything and trying to build new stuff. You see, these so-called social rents are going to be at least twice as expensive as council, and when they're built probably 4 times. So most people here now will be priced out. This is social cleansing.
At New London Architecture, an independent organisation set up to promote discussion of planning, development and architecture in the capital, a 12.5-metre-long scale model has been constructed to map and measure changes to the built environment in 19 of London's boroughs. And according to Chairman Peter Murray, despite the criticism and controversy that the city's tall buildings have attracted of late, it's not all bad news.
I think the design of the Gherkin absolutely changed the public's attitude to the design of tall buildings. Until that time, most people saw tall buildings as hideous concrete monstrosities. People could see that with really good quality design, you could have a really beautiful object on the skyline. Not all London's buildings are world class, obviously, but quite a few are. We do have buildings of very good quality in the Shard, for instance, the Gherkin or 30 St Mary Axe, in the Leadenhall building, the cheese grater. These are buildings of the sort of quality that you wouldn't see anywhere else in the world. Having foreign investors in London is absolutely a positive, because if we didn't have them, we wouldn't have very much development going on. I think if this is being abused, though, then we need to tax that in some way that would provide an incentive for people to use those dwellings rather than to leave them empty. The majority of the new build which have been allocated to residential is because that is the demand for new build. There needs to be a balance between where we need economic growth and how these new buildings impact on the skyline. And getting that balance right is something I don't think we've cracked yet.
But why haven't we cracked it? No doubt London's complicated network of protected views present a unique challenge. It's not just impulsive architects that create sloping or oddly shaped designs. The need to preserve lines of sight to St Paul's and other significant landmarks has been an important factor too. But a better place to look for answers may be City Hall.
This is not really a planned strategy. This is an accidental consequence of financial and economic mainsprings on the one hand, and on the other, a long-term failure to have any sort of policy about high-rises in London at all, other than those imposed in very particular places like the City of London. Now, unfortunately, both Ken and his successor, Boris Johnson, while preaching about the virtues of design, in reality have ended up being prepared to approve almost any average old design for a tall building. Why? Because in each case there was a payoff to London which had nothing to do with development. Ken Livingstone wanted lucrative commercial development to take place because it was one of the ways that he thought he could get funding for a social housing programme for which he had no budget. Boris was desperate to get funding for Crossrail. So what does he do? He hands out planning permissions for tall buildings over the heads of local authorities in some instances, tearing up the whole idea of localism.
But is it possible for any mayor of London to approach planning in a way that both addresses the economic and housing demands of London without building either up with new unpopular towers or out into protected greenbelt land? According to the people behind Create Streets, it is. The social enterprise was set up to campaign for the idea that the city should be largely regenerated with dense terraced housing and medium-rise flats, thereby making efficient use of the available land and providing a solution that has more in common with what normal people say that they want.
We found 7 controlled surveys, and they show a very clear theme that people report lower levels of happiness living in very big buildings. Until we get to a planning and design system where developers are incentivized to build things that people like, as opposed to what they can get planning permission for, because they're very different things, we're smoking something. Anyone who says that London needs to either grow up or grow out doesn't know anything about the available land in London. There is a huge amount of land out there. There is a lot of brownfield land owned by the public sector. There are also lots of post-war estates at much lower densities than the streets that they replaced. I think the next mayor needs to recruit the right staff and lead a strategic programme of well-connected streets, of terraced houses or medium-rise flats. When you compare that to the available land that can provide up to 70 or 80 years worth of London's housing need, we don't need to build these towers.
We now know that the mayoral hot seat has been filled by Labour's Sadiq Khan after he beat the Conservative candidate Zach Goldsmith at the polls. Having branded himself the council estate boy who could fix the Tory housing crisis, the pressure is already on. Khan has pledged to set up an affordable homes task force, set a target of making 50% of all new homes genuinely affordable, and promised to prevent new developments from being sold off-plan to wealthy foreign investors before they're offered to Londoners. But whether he will be able to tread a policy tightrope that pleases residents, architects and the business community, all while balancing the books, remains to be seen. One thing is for certain though, the new mayor is just about to find out firsthand that governing London's skyline is nothing if not a tall order.